there's been lots of advancements in integration technology over the past decades, better, faster, cheaper ways of basically doing data integration. What's interesting though is even if that advanced to the point where it was snap your fingers, everything is integrated instantaneously as long as you know exactly what you want to do, that actually doesn't fix the real issue causing projects to actually go slow. The reality is that is just the tip of the iceberg. There's all this stuff that lies beneath the waterline here. And that hidden complexity of collaboration is the real reason the projects take so long and cost so much. And I think the part of the problem has been we've been so focused on accelerating integration and not dealing with what's below, the tip of the iceberg.
It's a really great analogy. And what I would add to this is this is one iceberg. Now imagine, the frozen Arctic Sea. And every project is doing all of this stuff. So right. That hidden complexity, I guess I'm below the waterline. I'm dealing with all this stuff. But then there are 100 other projects that are doing the same thing. And particularly the way most organizations are put together is, there's one central team that's dealing with all of this, right? The central data team. And there's only so many of them that go around. So that's where the backlog happens because, project 1 gets the attention and project 2, 3, 4 through 99 have to wait until the resources free up. So this is a huge cost.
It is. It just makes me prior to being at Cinchy, I used to work in big banks. And I remember one of the projects that I was managing, it was like a $30 million plus project that was supporting some new regulations coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, where there was some new reporting requirements back to regulators. And the $25 to $30 million project, guess how much of that was spent on doing this type of work? $25 to $30 million. It was all that. So, on the surface, you could say, well, that's all the cost of integration. It's an integration-centered project. But it wasn't like there was tens of thousands of programmers all busy punching out code, right? It was meetings. It was whiteboards. It was documents going back and forth. Like it was all not the build of the integration and not the build of the solution. It was all this stuff, right? This is huge. This is the limiter to enterprise agility.
And the integration itself is not the point, right? That's not the goal. It's the
exactly.
End. Yeah. And you spend so much time, and I've been involved in more than one project that kind of collapsed under its own weight because you couldn't get past all this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Compare that to, what organizations actually need, which is what the integration is intended to deliver. And, they need it yesterday, not 3 years from now.
Right. Yeah. Something I say often is you don't want to do integration. You want your systems to be integrated. And so I want that outcome, but the effort to achieve that outcome is where the challenge is, right? And it's all that hidden complexity. So if you really appreciate that, really what you're trying to do is get it integrated such that you can have continuous collaboration, then you start to realize that integration as we define it, building APIs and ETLs and ELTs and all these different techniques and protocols and standards to move data around an organization is actually, quite frankly, a terrible way to collaborate because it doesn't deal with the pain of collaboration.
One of the scenarios that happens, and being in a company right now that is very document oriented and collaborative document oriented to boot, is sometimes when you enable collaboration, someone can go in and edit the document. If you're doing that together, real time, then you can talk about a change that works for one person, and someone can push back and say, that doesn't really help my cause in this document.
Right.
If you're doing that asynchronously, though, then this change happens. So I'm wondering, what in terms of data, right? There are sort of more risks involved in potential changes that work for one party and not for the other. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, let's use the document analogy again first. So let's go into even the presentation that I'm sharing here, right? So we actually use the Google Stack and this Google Slides. And so now I'm in edit mode and I can go into the version history and I can see the history of change to this presentation. And you can see that, April 5th, 11:18 p.m., I made some changes to it, and then I made some changes to it. But then I can see that Ron made some changes at 1 p.m. And I can expand that, and it will actually highlight exactly what's changed, right? So it's showing me what's changed. And if I wanted to, I can restore this. I can make a copy of this. I can basically, I can figure out exactly who changed what when. So if I go into now a data collaboration platform, and let's go to a collection of companies data as an example. And if I pop into that, because here we're collaborating on, in this scenario, it's structured data. And you can see there's a bunch of companies here. And some of it is read-only, some of it is editable, and other people will have access to that. And all that's determined by whoever ultimately is the owner of the data product. They're the ones that define those policies and controls. But similarly, I can just right-click, go to collaboration log, and now I'm seeing the history of change. Now, in this case, it wasn't humans, it was systems.
Right.
So I can see that HubSpot made changes, and then we did an LEI enrichment, which is a unique identifier for a corporation. And then Google came in and did some address standardization, and I can roll back the change. I can see who did it. I can put approvals on this, but it works very similar. The difference, though, is, this is showing it from a structured data perspective, and this is showing it from an unstructured document perspective. Yeah. But conceptually, it's the same.
Okay. So then, I assume there's also the possibility for, suggested changes that then someone who has elevated privileges can then, accept or reject, right?
Yeah, and that's where it starts to go beyond what you might think of in a document collaboration platform. Like I can switch into suggest mode, and others can then see the suggestions and review them. It's the same idea here, where I can, and this table is not enabled for that, but I can turn on basically approvals such that I can now give a group of people the ability to request changes. Maybe they want to add a record or change a record or delete a record, but only someone who has the authorization to approve can then either approve or reject that, as well as being able to have, conversations and put, comments in line and have kind of threads of this. Like everything you're seeing here is conceptually the same. It's a little bit different because the way that you experience structured data versus, a PowerPoint presentation is going to be different, but all the concepts are the same.
Yeah. So that brings up an interesting thought, right? From the ETL world, one of the challenges is conforming data, right? And you have several sources that are on the same data subject. You've got to decide who is most equal of the say three different sources, right? But I imagine, based on what you're describing here, is that the three sources that you just cited for a change, it's Google. The other one,
it was an LEI registry.
Right, the LEI one, right? So you could probably say, the Google change takes precedence, then the HubSpot, and then the LEI, or whatever order makes business sense, right? And that really is impressive, because that gives you that ability to conform data that's completely flexible and on the fly, and it's not hard coded into some ETL process, right? It's a configuration that gets applied every time data comes in.
Yeah, it is powerful. Like I think of this as a bit of a superpower. That being said, it's not magic, because there's still, at the end of the day, someone's owning the data product, and they're the ones configuring this, right? And so, like, you can see the way that we've modeled it for us in our context of a company is we actually have the address in this case for this company came from HubSpot. And then ZoomInfo enriched it. So you can see here, it was this, but then ZoomInfo, which is a fourth source here, basically overrid it and added in Suite 300 to it. But then you can see Google came in, and the way that the data product owner here configured this, and this is a choice, they could have just simply had it overwrite to that, which would then push the change back into other systems, depending on the configuration, is they actually separated that into a separate field and called it the intelligent address. So there's basically the raw address and then the smart address. But again, this is the role of the people who ultimately are creating and owning the data products. Are these two attributes or are they one attribute? And if it's one attribute, how does survivorship work, right? And all the typical MDM type concepts very much apply. But because when you think about data collaboration, you can think about collaborating on a data set, but really what you're collaborating on is like data cells, right? And in this case, Google has access to this cell to change it, but it can read this, but it doesn't need access to write to it, right? And it doesn't need access to information about the company, so you can really control that to a very granular level.
And that is compared to the ETL way of doing that is a much faster, more flexible way of managing it through configuration, and it makes it easier for someone with business domain knowledge, which is critical to make those determinations, right? To help manage the configurations rather than having to wait in line for the availability of an ETL developer to change the code.
Yeah, absolutely. And ETL, don't forget, it's generally only in the context of when you're moving data from A to B. What if there's no movement, but you want to change it, right? It's kind of a weird, wacky way of implementing such rules. Like when we talk to customers around, how do you deploy this technology? Like, what's the process side of it, right? There's people, process, tools. You're seeing some of the tools, but what's the process side of it? We suggest a 3-step process, which is you start by liberating data, and then you build your data products off of data that has been liberated. So you start with liberation, then you do productization, and then the data products are what you then enable collaboration on, right? So don't enable collaboration on application-specific data in an application-specific model that hasn't been certified by a data product owner, right? It's this weird, don't just have raw data exposed for everyone. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about actual data collaboration, even in operational contexts. So the process side of it is just as important as the people and the tools.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that as you said, that's a really important aspect of what we're trying to achieve with thinking of data as a product. Right. And the whole, whether you do it as data mesh or not, right? The principle that there's domain knowledge and people who know this data and how it's supposed to work within, a certain business context. And they've always been kind of on the outside of the process, right? Occasionally, you talk to them occasionally and try to understand what they say and then go implement it. And this brings them part of the collaboration is, in the moment, do it. Here it is, done. Now, next. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm a data product owner, I'm now actually in control, right? Whereas in the old world, before there was enabling technologies and processes and whatnot, who was in control? Nobody really. It was the apps. Right. And if we kind of just zoom out a little bit and just look at the consequences of trying to do data collaboration without data collaboration, just like trying to do document collaboration without document collaboration, like just with file systems and emails and stuff. Right. So you got apps that manage data, old, new, cloud, on-prem, that all do integrations, those gray lines between them, APIs, ETLs, and of course, you got the occasional spreadsheet. You've got your analytics solution. You've got your governance solutions. And as you add more business capabilities, you're adding more lines. And what we were talking about earlier is that, there's those lines, but what is that line comprised of? Well, we know that a very small piece of that is the actual build of the integration. But the bulk of it is that hidden complexity of collaboration, right? So every project has many lines and every organization has many projects, right? So there's a heck of a lot of red on the board, which is just begging for like tooling to streamline, right? And move away from all that manual intensive work. And that's where data collaboration comes in, right? Because the idea is that if I contrast the left to the right, because they're both starting from the same starting position, right? I got existing systems, existing integrations. I'm not going to rebuild them. But for any net new, instead of doing a direct integration, I'm going to start with a liberation. And why would I achieve that liberation, it's because I want to enable collaboration. So if I go back to the Google Drive analogy again, before we moved to such technologies, guess what? We already had documents and we were already working on them. It wasn't like we were going to delete all existing documents and start from scratch, right?
Oh, totally. As you're describing that, I'm like thinking, well, okay, so from my experience, there's one company who kept what salespeople were on which teams in a spreadsheet. And that often disagreed with the HR system that also had reporting responsibilities and teams.
Right.
Yeah. And going back to the bigger picture we were talking about, where there's lots of this going on and limited resources to do it, that project never really got the time of day to fix that problem. But it was a constant, source of disparate results between sales and anybody else who was using the HR version of reporting responsibilities. And then it eventually affected how revenue was reported into which teams and which territories, et cetera. Right. It was an intractable problem. The sales team was very married to their process with the Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So this would have been a perfect solution for that scenario.
Yeah, because what it does, and again, this is more of an approach. There's many different ways of implementing this approach, but the approach really is to create a bridge, right, from the siloed world to the collaborative world, and not make it so that to enter the world of collaboration, you need to recreate everything from the ground up, right? No one has time to rip and replace and rebuild every spreadsheet and rebuild every application. It's just not going to happen. You need to have basically the ability to install the local client, point it to your files, and double click and say make it available for collaboration, and still have the file there locally, and any local dependencies still work. But now I can give access to other people, and they don't have to come to me and bug me for copies. And we're always on the latest live version, right? We have basically we can now collaborate without the pain of collaboration, because the technology now makes that possible.
Another thing that's under the waterline there, where all we're talking about Excel files, is a lot of business intelligence built into a lot of different spreadsheets, right? So why didn't the sales team want to give up their spreadsheet? Because it was just one component in a whole system of files that kind of ran their business. And to your point about, you can't rip and replace that without it being a major project.